What is good, Raider Nation? It's your boy Sanjit back at it with another video. Today we're talking about this loss to the Denver Broncos. This one absolutely sucks, man. If you guys ask me, um, I don't even know how else to say it. This year, so far this season, the Raiders have came out and beat teams that we shouldn't have beaten. We come out and lost the teams we shouldn't have lost to, and it's just bad football across the board. And it's not all bad. There are good moments, right? Like against the Broncos here, the Raiders started off hot. The Raiders should have beat the Denver Broncos. Like there's no questions about it. The Raiders should have beat the Denver Broncos. And unfortunately, one bad decision by the quarterback, Gardner Minshew, an interception that went the other way for a pick six, basically ended the Raiders' possibility of winning this game. And it wasn't over, right? Because the score was technically 10-10 at that point, but the Raiders just weren't able to bounce back, essentially, right? And we're going to talk about it, man. We're going to get into all of you guys' questions because I have super chats if you guys want to be featured on the channel. Make sure you guys drop a super chat. Let's just get right into this. I'm just pulling up some stats here because just want to kind of get into it. Where did the Raiders go from this point, man? It's such a hard decision because I understand people are going to say you tank the rest of the season. Right, you tank the season, you get a quarterback, but that doesn't fix the issues, right? Getting a quarterback is not going to actually make you a Super Bowl caliber team. Getting a quarterback does nothing, right? Because at the end of the day, this game's not won based off of who your quarterback is. This game is essentially won based off the team. It's based off of do you have a good roster, and then do you have a good play caller? And I think right there is where the big issue is for the Las Vegas Raiders. There was a play when Aiden MConnell came in at the end of the game where for some reason our offensive coordinator had this guy roll to his left, right? They even had Andre James loop around, right? It's not a pull, it's a loop, right? So he goes forward and around, and he essentially got out there to block for Aiden McConnell, but they rolled him to the left. That doesn't make sense. He's a right-handed quarterback, and he's not super quick. He's not super fast. Those things just don't make sense, and that's on the play caller. And the tough thing is when you look at the Raiders, you really consider like the flow of this game. The hard thing is Gardner Minshew was 9 of 9, 110 yards, a touchdown. We're at the 5-yard line, up 10-0. I think at that point it might have been 10-3. The Raiders should have probably blown out the Denver Broncos. Like at the beginning of this game, it seemed like this game was basically going to be over. To me, it seemed like the Raiders had won this game. We're on this drive all the way down, and Gardner Minshew throws a bad pass. Now, I'm not sure if he was trying to throw that to Jacoby Myers. I don't personally think he was, but some people are saying he was trying to get the ball into Jacoby Myers. I personally felt like he was actually trying to hit Brock Bowers, but the fact that he had a guy in his face and he was rolling to his left and he's a right-handed quarterback, so he kind of had to throw it cross-body. I feel like because of that, the pass ended up just being a bad pass, right? I didn't think he was not trying to hit Brock Bowers on that play. But regardless, it was a bad pass. Patrick Surtain intercepted it. He ran it 100 yards to the house. And that play right there flipped the entire game for the Raiders. That play right there, where Gardner Minshew essentially throws that pick six, was the difference in this game. From that point, the Denver Broncos basically scored, I believe they scored 31 straight points. I think they scored 31 straight points from that point forward. So, that was basically where the Raiders ended up losing. I'm going to get into some of your guys' super chats. Shout out to the over 700 people that have already tuned in. Hit that thumbs up button, man. Hit that thumbs up button. Subscribe if you guys are not subscribed already. There's a lot of comments coming in, so I'm going to try to get to as many as I can. But super chats show up right at the top, so super chats is always the way to go. Plus, it's a way to support the channel. YRK World said Minshew needs to go. How do you do that easy touchdown? How do you miss that easy touchdown? I'm not 100% sure, right? I think he was trying to hit Brock Bowers, but we'll see, right? I'm sure they'll ask him the question in the post-game interview. We're going to talk about the quarterbacks as well. We'll talk about some of the difference. Aiden McConnell came in. He did drive us downfield on that one touchdown. It was against the prevent style of defense. And to be fair, the score was only 10-20 when Aiden McConnell got the ball. Had he scored a touchdown on either of the first two drives, we're still in the game technically. He didn't, and then out of nowhere, we're down 10-34, right? Before he essentially drove us downfield and scored another touchdown. It's unfortunate, man. It's just inconsistent football. And even the run game wasn't all that good today. Like, There are moments for sure, but Madison got 15 carries today, and he averaged 2.5 yards per attempt. I talked about this entire week, man. I mentioned it multiple times. Uh, I said that, Alexander Madison may be a great number 2 running back, but if he's given, 17 carries the way Zeus was last week, will he be able to take advantage of those opportunities? And we found out he wasn't able to, right? He did have some good carries, but a lot of them went for like 1 or 2 yards. And at some point, Amir Abdullah ended up playing more snaps than Alexander Madison did. And I'm not sure why that happened, especially in the second half. To me, it seemed like Abdullah played more. Also, if you don't want to feature Alexander Madison, where the hell's Dylan Labe? Let's put this guy in. Let's give this guy some carries, Saw M, shout out to you, said enough is enough. AP isn't it, and it trickles down. I'm sick AF. 100% agree, man. I did not want Antonio Pierce as the Raiders coach, man. I support the guy because I support the Raiders, and I don't want to be negative. I don't want to be that type of channel. But I've been very, very clear before we even hired Antonio Pierce that he is not the guy that I want. I would have taken Harbaugh over Antonio Pierce. And the fact that we did take AP, there are some positives, right? Ben Johnson, the Lions offensive coordinator, Bobby Slowick, the Texans offensive coordinator, these guys didn't take jobs this past offseason. And that's a positive for the Raiders, because if the Raiders don't want to keep AP at the end of this year, we can hopefully get one of those 2 guys. And I think we'd be better off with one of those 2 guys. To me, you got to have a good offensive play caller no matter what. I think it's the most important aspect of being a good football team. If your offensive coordinator can't call good plays the way we've seen with Lucchesi, you have no shot. I am confident that a good offensive coordinator with Gardner Minshew or with Aiden MConnell on this Raiders team would be a lot better for the Raiders. Like, if we actually were able to bring in Cliff Kingsbury the way we initially wanted to, I think the Raiders would actually be a better football team. Like, I really think Cliff Kingsbury is a much, much better coordinator than is Luke Getsy. And I think Getsy's really the one that's holding us back. Think about this. Aiden McConnell came in when the score was 10-20, and he did nothing with his first 2 drives. I know the second one, is debatable because on the first play, technically Aiden McConnell threw an interception. That's more so, I think, of the fact that he's not experienced. He tried throwing a very, very high velocity pass to Brock Bowers. As Bowers was running that slant route, that's inexperience, because oftentimes that's not likely to be completed, and there's a high probability of those passes being tipped up as well and potentially being an interception, and we saw that one get intercepted. But the drive before that, I think the Raiders went 3 and out essentially on that drive. I don't know. Aiden McConnell, Gardner Minshew, I think at this point doesn't really matter too much. I think the Raiders aren't going to be able to overcome Luke Getsy as an offensive coordinator. I think he's way too predictable. One of the things that I personally do is I look at tendencies. So every week I'll look at the Raiders' tendencies. I have access to this platform called Telemetry. Basically, it's an advanced platform that measures all the crazy ass stuff out there, right? And our tendencies are very, very easy to predict. Right, first down, run, second down, run, third down, pass. That's like 50% of the time what the Raiders end up doing. To start the drives, especially, it's like a high percentage. They're going to run the ball twice, and then they're going to throw the ball. 2-minute offense, right? The Raiders run this power run play like, I think every time we've had the ball this season and we're about to start a 2-minute drive, right, which means essentially the final drive leading up to either the end of the first half or the end of the game, the Raiders start off with like a power run towards the right. I don't know why that's the case, but like 27% of the time, they're calling the same play, and it just doesn't make sense to me, man. Our tendencies are really, really messed up. Damian Weaver said, damn, Gardner Minshew really fell apart. But what's more concerning is Antonio Pierce couldn't correct anything. Luke Getsy is terrible and shelled up too. What's crazy is Gardner Minshew was really, 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 really good that first quarter. 9-9, 110 yards, a touchdown. He had driven us downfield on essentially 3 of 3 drives, right? That third drive, we're all the way down at the 5-yard line. How do you have one bad pass, one bad play, and out of nowhere, it's just all bad from that point forward? How does that happen, right? I understand with Gardner Minshew, we're going to get those bad plays where he throws those interceptions. But how do you not recover, right? Like, I understand the momentum aspect of it, right? I totally understand that. I played football. I know how that stuff goes, right? But how do you not bounce back? Even in the second half, like, it was just bad, man. It was bad, and it was bad. It got worse and worse. It's unfortunate, man. It really, really is unfortunate. Antonio Pierce is a bad coach, in my opinion. I will stick with that 100%. He is not a good coach. And it's not that he's not a good coach because he doesn't call plays, right? That's his own argument. I think Antonio Pierce is not a good coach because he doesn't know how to manage a game properly. There was a point, I believe it was in the first half. I think it was probably the second to last drive of the first half. It was some point late in the second quarter. 3rd and 5, the Raiders decided to run the football. They picked up 3 yards. 4th and 2, they punted the football. And I understand the decision aspect of it makes sense, right? Or I understand the decision aspect of on 4th down, you punt the football to pin them back. That part of it makes sense, and I'm not disagreeing with that. But why are you running it on 3rd and 5, right? Because on 4th and 2, if you're going to punt the ball, you can punt the ball on 4th and 5 too. It's the same thing. It doesn't make a difference, right? You can punt the ball on 4th and 10, 4th and 5, 4th and 3. It doesn't matter. But on 3rd and 5, you want to throw the football past the sticks, right? You want to try to pick that first down up. And for some reason, the Raiders didn't do that. They decided to run the football. It just didn't make sense to me, right? Luke Getsy, I don't know, man. It's just unfortunate, man. I don't know how the Raiders ended up getting stuck with this guy. I cover the Chicago Bears. You guys know this on the Football Scout channel. They're one of like the 7 teams that I talk about pretty much every other week. And I watched Luke Getsy enough for the last 2 years when he was with the Bears that he was the issue with the Chicago Bears. Luke Getsy was the reason why Justin Fields' career, essentially is where it's at, right? Because as a quarterback, Fields had upside. He came in and he just never had a good coach to actually get him to that point. And I think with the Steelers, he's finally able to, kind of do some things. I know the Steelers have a great defense as well, but I don't know, man. It's unfortunate. Shout out to you, Tank Dempsey, for the $5 super chat. You said Mitch hates Gruden. I don't think he knows ball because I remember Gruden always called plays around his players, and we always scored 30 points, 30 plus. I'm not sure who Mitch is. I don't know, but it could be Mitch O'Ryan. Not 100% sure, but I like John Gruden. Man, I think John Gruden was a good coach, and I think it's unfortunate the Raiders fired John Gruden at the point they fired him. If I was the owner of the team at that point, I would not have fired him. I wouldn't have even cared about the reports that had come out at that point. I would have still kept him, right? To me, you don't fire someone for stuff 10 years in the past or whenever it was. I don't know, man. It is what it is. The one good thing with Antonio Pierce that I will say is he did. I shouldn't say he hired Patrick Graham. I guess he technically didn't. I guess Josh McDaniels technically hired Patrick Graham. But Patrick Graham has done a good job building this defense, right? We do have some good players that are young, especially. I think Ja'Cory Bennett's one of the guys that has looked really, really good. I think another guy that's looked pretty good this season is Nesta Jade Silvera. Although he doesn't flash like crazy, he's a 7th-round pick. He's looked pretty good at times. And to be fair, he ended up taking the jobs of a guy we took in the 3rd round last year as well in Byron Young, a guy that we drafted in the 4th round in Neil Farrell Jr., and a guy drafted in the 5th round in, I think it was Matthew Butler as well. So to be fair, Jade Silvera's looked good. Ja'Cory Bennett's looked good. We got Jack Jones, right? And that was like an AP connection as well. So there's been guys that we've been able to kind of bring in because of AP. Patrick Graham as well has done a good job. I do think the Raiders do have some weapons on the defensive side, and I do think they have a good future, right? And I think that's one of the things we do have to be optimistic about. I also do see a comment if Christian Wilkins is okay. So Christian Wilkins did have a foot injury, and he was obviously knocked out of this game. Now, I'm not 100% sure when that happened. I hope it didn't happen when Adam Butler tackled Christian Wilkins. I don't know if you guys saw that, if you guys watched the game live, or if you guys were at the game, you guys might have missed it. But there was a moment where Christian Wilkins got a sack, and he was essentially celebrating, and Adam Butler jumped on the back of Christian Wilkins. Now, I'm not sure if that was the point where he hurt his foot, but he hurt his foot, and unfortunately he came off the field, and he was out of the game. And I hope that's not a long-term injury, because that would be the worst-case scenario for the Raiders right now. We're already struggling on the defense, which is its own conversation, which we'll get into at some point. At some point, the Raiders got to figure it out on the defensive side of the football. 34 points, 2 turnovers essentially led to those to 14 of those 34. But the Raiders haven't forced any turnovers on the defensive side, right? I think they have 1 turnover in the first 5 games. That's not good enough, right? The Raiders haven't been, and they've done a good job on the defense side, but we came into the season and we're like, hey, we're going to be a top 5 defense. Our defense is going to dominate people. And then our offense, will be able to, give our playmakers the football, and they'll be able to, pick their poison on the offensive side. But it really started with the defense is going to dominate people. And we have been good at times, but we haven't forced turnovers. And I think that's a big part of potentially winning football games. So you got to force turnovers. Shout out to Jody for the $20 super chat. I don't know if you had a comment, but if I see your comment, or if you do comment, we'll put it up. Shout out to you for the super chat. Shout out to David. $25 is cheap for therapy. Shout out to you, man. Thanks for all you do, Sanjit. So tired of this play year after year, decade after decade. It has to get fixed. I agree with you, man. But, I do think, and something does tell me, I really do think this. I think the Raiders are closer to being a playoff team today than they were at any point in the last 10 years. Right? And I know we made the playoffs a couple of times. Right? We made the playoffs in 2016, 2021. I think we are closer today than we have been in a long time to being a good team that can make the playoffs year in and year out. And what I mean by that is, if you look around the NFL and you look at the teams that are consistently in the playoffs, every single one of those teams has a couple of things, right? Like you look at the Niners, the Chiefs, you look even like a team like the Cowboys and a team like the Eagles, and those teams have elite players or elite positional units. So the 49ers, for example, have an absolute elite. They have probably 2 or 3 guys that are elite on the defensive side. You got Nick Bosa, you got Fred Warner. You also have, they've rotated in some corners and safeties via the draft. But then they also have an elite run game, right? So they have a couple of things that they're able to kind of put together that allows them to have success. You look at the Chiefs. They built around their offensive line. They obviously have a great quarterback. They have a great play caller in Andy Reid. They have a great defensive tackle, right? On the defense side, they have like 2 or 3 really, really good pieces. You look at the Cowboys, you look at the Eagles, you look at the Bills, right? To me, what I see with the Raiders that I feel like we actually have is we have a guy, Maxx Crosby, who's a really, really, really good football player. He had 2 sacks today, maybe 3. Definitely had 2, maybe 3. I think the third one didn't technically count as a sack. I think the quarterback picked up a yard. But the thing that the Raiders have is we have one really, really good defensive end in Maxx Crosby. We have Christian Wilkins, who's essentially a second piece to the defense. We got guys like Jack Jones, Ja'Cory Bennett. I think Ja'Cory Bennett's probably better than Jack Jones at this point. We have pieces, right? We have pieces on the defensive side. But what we need consistency on the offensive side. And the thing with our offense is we have pieces even on the offensive side, right? Colt Miller, I know he hasn't been great this season. It's going to take him time to be fully healthy. It's probably not going to happen this season, to be honest with you guys. But we have a good left tackle. We have a great left guard in Jackson Powers-Johnson. We have probably one of the top 2 or 3 tight ends in Brock Bowers. That catch he had was phenomenal at the beginning of the game. We have guys like Trey Tucker. We have guys like Michael Mayer. And I know Michael Mayer is not playing at the moment. He will be back for the Raiders at some point soon. What the Raiders need is they need a play caller, right? And then obviously potentially getting a quarterback. But I don't even think quarterback's the biggest issue for the Raiders right now. I know Gardner Minshew and McConnell had 3 total interceptions. I still think the play calling is the biggest issue. And one thing when I watch a team like the Texans or a team like the 49ers, one of the things these teams offensive coordinators do is they design plays where the spacing of the play is really, really nicely designed, right? So, for example, when I watch the Raiders tape, one of the things that Luke Getsy does a lot is we'll have like 4 guys run towards like the same 15-yard area, right? And that makes it easy to cover. On the other end, we have teams like the Texans. They'll put 2 wide receivers close to each other in the slot. One of the receivers will run towards the outside as he runs like a deep route. The other one will run towards the inside as he runs a deep route. And the spacing of the routes are really nicely designed by their coordinator. You watch the Niners, you watch the Rams. The spacing of those concepts are really, really nice. You watch the Raiders, our spacing's really bad, right? And that doesn't even get into the fact that there's guys that are confused sometimes. We're calling bootlegs with Aiden MConnell to the left. That makes no sense either, right? It's unfortunate, but I do think this Raiders team is a lot closer than I think a lot of people realize. I still think that this season can be a good season for the Raiders. I know people are going to say, hey, let's tank this season. Let's tank. I don't know if the Raiders should tank. I don't know if that's the best thing for the Raiders at this point, because the best coaches that are going to come out after this season right here, they're not going to say, hey, I want to go to a team that won 2 or 3 games last year, right? If Bobby Slowick comes out and he has the option of going to the Raiders that won 3 games versus going to the Jaguars that won like 7, 8 games, potentially, that just got rid of their coach, that's a good quarterback, that has a good offensive line, a run game, some weapons, He's going to go to that team. He's not going to come to the Las Vegas Raiders, right? So tanking might have its benefits where you can get a quarterback, but a quarterback's not going to just save everything for the Raiders, right? You just gotta be able to win games, man. That's what it comes down to. And these are the type of games that you can't give away, because the Raiders should have won this game. Like, for reals, they should have won this game. There's no reason why the Raiders lost this game against the Broncos. Let's get into some more super chats, man. Shout out to all you guys for the super chats. Dante said Gardner Minshew ended the game on the pick 6. I truly think he just didn't see the corner and tried to throw it to 16. He did it against Humphrey against the Ravens before. That is a fact. And he almost did it as well, potentially against the Browns last week. Right? There was a play where he threw it to Jacoby Myers and Denzel Ward was towards the right. Ward almost jumped it. And I wasn't sure. I actually broke down that tape on the channel. I said it on in that video. I said, I'm not sure if Gardner Minshew actually even saw this guy, right? There's a chance he may not have seen him. And there's a real chance that the play was to Jacoby Myers and he just didn't see Patrick Surtain. There's a real chance that happened. Same with that Humphrey play, right, where Marlon Humphrey came underneath it and he picked it off. That's a 100% fact, and I agree with you on that. So, it's unfortunate. Like, do you roll forward with Aiden MConnell at this point? Do you potentially see if Gardner Minshew can come back and win? I'm going to be honest. I think at this point, the Raiders just roll forward with Aiden MConnell. I'm not 100% sold on Aiden MConnell. I do think he has some limitations, but he actually did a pretty good job running around today. He's obviously a lot quicker than I actually realized. I think it makes more sense for the Raiders to go Aiden MConnell because at the worst case scenario, at least McConnell can potentially give your guys a spark. Right, he might be able to make your guys feel like, hey, we can win some games, right? Let's go forward the same way he did last year, right? And last year he wasn't that good, but last year he was a rookie. So hopefully this year can be a little bit better. I think Gardner Minshew has been way too inconsistent. Quarter 1 he'll score 10 points, quarter 2 he'll throw an interception, and then you have 12 yards the rest of the quarter, right? We can't win like that. So I think at this point it makes sense for the Raiders to go with Aiden McConnell. I'm sure the Raiders aren't going to make that decision yet, right? I'm sure when AP gets asked about that in the presser, if he hasn't already, and you guys tell me if you guys have already seen it, if AP has been, he's probably not going to commit to either quarterback at this point. But I think we should go with Aiden McConnell, and that too, that's coming from me. I'm a Gardner Minshew fan, right? I was predicting him to win the job. I wanted him to win the job, and I am telling you guys right now, it just doesn't make sense. He's too inconsistent. You can't win that way. That too, I think it makes more sense for a quarterback, just be more conservative. I think the worst thing you can do is throw interceptions, right? Yeah, I don't know. It's unfortunate. Shout out to you, Jody, for another super chat. You said, let's grab a guard or a running back in round 1 and grab Jackson Dart in round 2. I think he's going to be the next Josh Allen. Way better than any quarterback on our roster. Also, left guard has to go, or LG has to go. I'm not 100% sure exactly who you're talking about. I would disagree with drafting a guard in the first round. If we take Ashton Jeanty in the first round, I'd be cool with that, right? He's the only running back I take in the first round. I'm not sure, though, if it makes sense for the Raiders to draft a running back at this point. I do like Jackson Dart. I'm not sure if he's a second-round quarterback. He might even be a first-round quarterback. I don't know, right? I think as the season continues and as we get more tape, I think Jackson Dart I think they played South Carolina yesterday. Don't quote me on that. I think as we get more tape of teams, like Jaylen Monroe played Georgia last week, right? That's a great game to be able to analyze, right? You want to see guys playing the best competition, especially at that level, right? If you're Ole Miss, if you're Alabama, or because like for example, Shadir Sanders, Colorado, you don't want to watch Shadir Sanders tape against Georgia; they're going to get whooped, right? Colorado's not that tier of a college football team, at least not yet. So. I do agree with part of what you're saying. Now, I think Jackson Powers-Johnson at left guard has been legit. I do think we need to figure out the offensive line. DJ Glaze had some issues today. I think he gave up 2 sacks. He had I think he had 1 false start for sure. He might have even had a second one. Bo Nix looked pretty good as well for the Denver Broncos. And he's a rookie quarterback, 19-27, 206 yards, 2 touchdowns. He wasn't great, but he made plays, and ultimately he protected the football. You can't have 3 interceptions if you're the Las Vegas Raiders and think you're going to win a football game. It is not happening, right? You can't have that type of turnovers essentially and think that's what it is. I see a lot of people saying, and I don't know if this is fact, but We'll wait on that one here. Tony Delgado said offensive line and Getty are what's killing us. Also, no rhythm or flow in the play calling, heart crushing. Yeah, man. I don't know, man. Offensive line, I think, is okay. It's definitely gotten better, right? I do think the offensive line has gotten better a little bit. Luke Gessie, I think, is really, really bad. And I think the rhythm aspect and the flow aspect is killing us. In the first and second drives of this game, right? Essentially in the first quarter, the Raiders were in rhythm, right? We had a couple of nice runs. We popped a couple big ones. I think Amir Abdullah had like a 40-yard run. We had some good flow. We had some good rhythm. And, it looked good at that point. And then I think as Gardner Minshew kind of threw that interception, things kind of shifted. We came back. We went 3 and out. And it just didn't look good from that point forward, And I think a big part of it is the rhythm, right? I think as an offensive coordinator, especially, one of the things we got to recognize with these guys is, in the first play of the game, you might run a wide zone towards the left. And then on the second play of the game, it might be a wide zone play action, right? So wide zone towards the left, play action, bootleg towards the right. On the fifth play, it might be a wide zone play action towards the left, bootleg toward the right, screen back towards the left, right? These are different things that, you're going to show the defense, it's going to keep them honest. To me, that's what the Raiders got to do. And our offensive coordinator is not able to do that at this point, right? And with that, I think a big part of the Raiders losing at this point is because of that, right? I really do think that our rhythm's bad, our flow is bad. It's just unfortunate, man. It really, really is. I appreciate all the super chats that are coming in. Who said Luke Getsy sucks. Tyree Wilson sucks. I felt like Tyree Wilson has played a little bit better, personally. But I'm not 100% sure if he's worth the 7th overall pick, right? Considering that Jalen Carter and Darnell Wright look pretty good at this point. I will also say this, I see a lot of people saying that the offensive line is not very good. I do agree that, Colt Miller's struggling at this point. I don't think that's going to get fixed at all this season. Jackson Powers-Johnson has looked good, but he's a rookie, so he's going to have his moments where he's going to lose as well. Plus, as more teams get taped, they're going to realize that, look, this guy might struggle with here or there, and then they're going to start running things at him. DJ Glaze is in his third game at this point. Teams have tape. They know what this guy struggles with at this point, and they're going to study that, and they're going to attack that, right? So at this point, that's what the Raiders are kind of dealing with, right? We got 2 rookies starting. Dylan Parham has looked good at times, but today he had some issues as well. The center's been inconsistent. Our left tackle, who was supposed to be our best offensive lineman, has looked inconsistent. So although there's moments, our offensive line definitely has struggled. I agree with that. I do agree with 100% what you're saying. I'm going to get into some more of these super chats. Tank Dempsey said trade for Stafford. Maxx loves him. I don't think the Raiders are going to be able to trade for Matthew Stafford. 2, it would cost a lot of money to bring him in, I think. Not money, but a lot of draft capital to bring him in. I don't think the Rams are ready to move off of Stafford. I think Sean McVay probably wants to roll forward with Matthew Stafford for at least this season, and maybe they even take a quarterback right in this next upcoming draft. Appreciate the super chat. You had a second super chat as well. You said Howard is still a free agent. That's an interesting point as well right there. I'm not sure if we need I don't know 100% sure if we need a corner at this point. I feel like we need a quarterback. But really, could we trade for an offensive coordinator, man? Because that's what we really, really need at this point. All right, maybe we're able to trade for one of these offensive coordinators out there. Saw M, shout out to you, said, what's crazy is how Cliff Kingsbury and Jaylen Daniels just clicked and they're winning. I think they're 4-1, right? Or maybe they're not. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're 3-2. But the Commanders have definitely looked good, man. I think Jaylen Daniels has been cooking out there, which is kind of crazy. I actually did not think Jaylen Daniels would be as good as he is early on. And it's not even just Jaylen Daniels. Caleb Williams has been a man himself as well, right? Like, these rookie quarterbacks are coming in. They're having success. But we also do have to recognize Cliff Kingsbury is a really good offensive coordinator, as is Shane Waldron. Shane Waldron's a really, really good coach as well. Shane Waldron is Caleb Williams' offensive coordinator at this point. Last year, Shane Waldron was with the Seattle Seahawks, right? He was a big reason why the Seahawks and Geno Smith especially ended up bouncing back, right? Geno Smith, I think, was 3 years ago. That was when Shane Waldron first got to the Seahawks. There's a reason why these young guys are coming in and having success, right? And a big part of that is because they're offensive coordinators. But it is crazy to think this, Al, that you know, we literally hired Cliff Kingsbury. Think about this. The Raiders hired Cliff Kingsbury, and you know, he ended up backing out of the job at the last moment. You know, there's different reports. Some people are like, oh, Mark Davis didn't want to pay him. Other people are saying Magic Johnson stepped in and said some shit to Cliff Kingsbury that made him want to come to the Commanders instead. I don't know what the official story is, right? But do note that we're never going to know the official story, because whatever you guys hear, there's someone on the other end of that pushing that story, right? Oh, Mark Davis didn't want to pay this guy. That's maybe what AP is story, you know, putting it out there. You know, oh, Magic Johnson stepped in and said X, Y, and Z. That's, you know, their side putting it out. We don't really know, right? A lot of the stuff that we are told by players and fans, and not fans, but players and our coaching staff, a lot of it's bullshit, man. We heard Devontae Adams say, oh, Luke Getsy's such a great coach. Luke Getsy was a bad coach with the Bears, man, and I was saying it the entire offseason. If you guys go and watch my Luke Getsy film breakdown that I did, it's still up. It's super easy to find. Put in Luke Getsy film breakdown. It'll come up right up. In that video, I literally talked about how Luke Getsy has spacing issues with his offense. And this is one of the things that pretty much every Bears fan was complaining about. His tendencies with the Bears are really bad, where it was very predictable. It's another thing Bears fans were saying about Luke Getsy. You know, not much changed for the Bears from last year to this year. Yeah, they got a new quarterback, but the offensive linemen are pretty much the same as they were last year. They did add two weapons with forget, it was Keenan Allen that they ended up getting. I think it was Keenan Allen, and then Adunze as well, the rookie wide receiver. But the big difference for the Bears was the offensive coordinator, because even on the defensive side, it's mostly the same. It's the same head coach, the same guy calling the defensive plays. It's the same group of guys on the defensive side, and they're a lot better this year, right? And a big part of that, in my opinion, is the offensive coordinator, right? I really do think that's a big part of why they're a lot better. But it is kind of crazy to think, man, because the Raiders wanted Cliff Kingsbury and they're trying to trade up or potentially bring in Jaylen Daniels. And imagine how much different our team could actually have been, right, if we did somehow get the Washington Commanders to allow us to jump up and get Jaylen Daniels, right? It would have been potentially crazy. Mandel says, give us your offseason plan if you're the general manager. This one's easy, man. It's really, really, really simple. I'm firing Antonio Pierce. I'm firing Luke Getsy. I would try to keep Patrick Graham, but I don't think he would end up saying either. But I would try to keep him. But I'm definitely firing AP. I'm definitely firing Luke Getsy. It depends on where our pick is. I'm targeting a quarterback for sure in the first round, but I'm paying Bobby Slowick and I'm paying Ben Johnson whatever they want. All right, if they want $15 million a year, I would pay Bobby Slowick that 100%. Ben Johnson, I'd probably give that to him as well. And I would bring in a guy that calls plays, and I would make him our head coach. Right, because play callers are the guys that control the NFL. The best teams are mostly guys that have, or mostly teams that have good play callers. Very, very rare that you'll get a team out there that does not have a good play caller. Unless you have Tom Brady, who in himself is basically a play caller out there, you got to have a good play caller to win games. So I'm hiring Bobby Slowick. I'm hiring Ben Johnson. Clint Kubiak is still kind of inexperienced a little bit, but he might be an option the following year. It just depends what happens. And then I'm targeting a quarterback in the first round, right? I do think the Raiders need to get a quarterback. Now, you could go this next year without a quarterback if you really wanted to, right? If you really felt that, hey, we need to get ourselves a difference-making wide receiver. There's three guys in this class that I think are very, very good. You got Luther Burden out of Missouri, very, very solid wide receiver. You got Travis Hunter, right? Plays both wide receiver and corner. I think he'll get drafted as a wide receiver. And then you got the guy, McMillan, out of Arizona. He's like 6'5", super fast, super explosive. You can target him. Isaiah Bond's another guy. If you don't take a wide receiver in the first, you can probably get Bond in the second. He's out of Texas. The offensive line class is really weak, so I'm not taking a first-round offensive lineman this year. That's it. That's the plan, right? And that'll get us right back to where we need to get into. Now, I would take a guard. I would take a right guard probably in the second or third round. And then I'd move Dylan Parham to center as well, right? And then I'd probably just keep Andre James as a backup and then release him down the line. I think you could also fix your offense line in that aspect. Now, you could target a right tackle, but I would give DJ Glaze 1 or 2 more years to see where he's at in his development. That's it, man. It's not – the Raiders don't have to do a lot to be successful. They really don't, right? It doesn't take – it's not rocket science to be a good football team. Ryan Poles did a great job with the Bears, and he did it right. He understood the assignment 2 years ago. and he put the Bears in perfect position for them to ultimately have success. Uh, Shout out to Macist, that guy. I don't know how to say your name, but shout out to you for the super chat. You said, we make changes with coaching and personnel year after year and get the same results. Dysfunction starts at the top. Mark Davis should sell to a winner. Mark Davis is never selling this team, man. He is never, ever, ever selling this team. Now, when Mark Davis does pass away at some point, I'm not sure who takes over the team at that point. My understanding, I don't think Mark Davis has any children. And Mark Davis is not also 100% owner of this team. There's other people that also own the Raiders. Mark Davis does happen to be majority owner of the team, but I'm not really sure. I don't ever see Mark Davis selling the team. And I don't even think Mark Davis is the issue with the Raiders. I understand, he does hire some of the people that run the team. I get it from that aspect. But all the Raiders got to do, man, is just hire an offensive coordinator that's good, right? Hire a good coach. That's all the Raiders have to do. You should have hired Andy Reid years ago, right? When he went to the Chiefs. I remember telling my brother that the Chiefs are going to be a really good team with Andy Reid as their coach. And I didn't think they're going to win multiple Super Bowls, but Andy Reid's a good coach. And you saw that when he was with the Eagles. Kyle Shanahan was a really, really good coach. And you saw that when he was with the Falcons, right? Kyle Shanahan took the Falcons to the Super Bowl and he left, and Dan Quinn got fired within a year and a half, right? So you can sometimes see when a guy's a good coach. Sean McVay was a great offensive coordinator when he got his chance with Washington. You can see it with coaches. CJ Stroud, everybody gives CJ Stroud so much credit, but CJ Stroud's as good as he is because of the situation he went into, specifically with the offensive coordinator. Same thing with Caleb Williams, same thing with Jaylen Daniels. And then you can look at it on the opposite side. Bryce Young had a bad situation he went into, and he failed as a quarterback. Right now, he's still young, so he might be able to bounce back. But to me, it's not about the fact that we're consistently making changes at the head coach position. The thing is we're hiring the wrong coaches, right? We're making decisions that just don't make sense. Rich Bisaccia should have never been the Raiders head coach. I agree with that, and nor should Antonio Pierce, right? Antonio Pierce should have never been the Raiders head coach either. Same with Josh McDaniels, right? There's coaches that you should keep as a coach, and there's coaches you shouldn't. Like John Gruden was not a bad coach to have. At least John Gruden knew how to design offenses, right? Yeah, I don't know, man. Ahmed, shout out to you. I like Dart, Aller, Ward. Thoughts on them? I like Dart. I think he's a good quarterback for sure. Ward, right? I think Penn State's what? Did Penn State lose yesterday? I don't think they did. I think they actually whooped on UCLA. I like Aller as well. I think he's a good quarterback as well. Ward, I think he's a good quarterback as well. The thing is, I don't know much about quarterbacks. I don't pretend I do. I'll be the first to tell you guys. You guys asked me about, Will Campbell. You guys asked me about Kelvin Banks. I'll tell you guys my thoughts on them. But when it comes to quarterbacks, I don't know a lot about quarterbacks. So I can't be 100% honest. Just I do think that Miller Moss is the guy that I personally like, right? USC. He probably won't come out, though, but he's the guy that I personally really like, right? So I do appreciate the super chat. 10 Commandments said Frank Reich was fired before he completed his first season at Carolina. If this undisciplined, poor tackling, bad play calling, and inconsistent play continues, it will be justified to fire Antonio Pierce, let Telesco choose his own coach. I agree with you 100% on this. Now, to be fair, Frank Reich's a pretty good coach, right? Frank Reich, and he's a good college coach, right? Frank Reich went to Nebraska, and he flipped the number 2 quarterback in the entire country. The quarterback he's the number 2 overall player in the country. He was committed to Georgia. Frank Reich went to Nebraska, and they flipped that commitment. And by flip, they just paid him a ton of money, right? And then he ultimately came to Nebraska. And Nebraska's a good team now at this point, right? But I agree with the general point you're making, right? The Raiders are showing us this season they're way more undisciplined than they were last year. Way worse at tackling. And, people call out Trayvon Merrick, but we should call out Robert Spillane as well. Spillane misses a ton of tackles, right? He has to clean it up as well. I know he's still our best linebacker, and I'm not disagreeing with that, but we got to call it as it is. Our play calling is terrible on the offense side. There's just no questions about that. The overall team is just inconsistent at this point. I actually think some of the players are checking out. I don't know if you guys feel the same way. I feel like there's players that are absolutely checking out. I think there's players that are going to want to be traded from the Las Vegas Raiders probably sooner rather than later. And it's unfortunate because We're only 2-3, and we got the Steelers next week. That's a winnable game. We play the Broncos again. That's a winnable game. We play the Chargers again. That's a winnable game. Right? We play teams like the Falcons, the Saints, and those teams are good, but those are all winnable games. Like, there's no game on this season where I say the Raiders can't beat that team. Right? But the unfortunate thing is it's just inconsistent. The penalties, being undisciplined, not making tackles, that stuff, you got to clean that stuff up. That's just like the small, super small stuff that you got to clean it up, I'm going to try to get into some of the more recent comments. I'm like 10 minutes behind. There's a lot of super chats, and I always appreciate that, as always. And we're going to go through all of them just so you guys know. So Nick, shout out to you, Sid. Raiders have been predictable for 20 plus years. Run on first, pass on second with the penalty, throw screen on third and long, punt, and repeat. Fire Luke, hire Rich B. I don't know, man. I don't know about hire Rich B. I don't know who Rich B is. I'm assuming it's Rich Bisaccia. I don't know. But I do think the Raiders got to fire Luke Getsy. And I do think that the Raiders also need to figure out who's going to call the plays at that point. We have a ton of coaches on this roster, right? I do think the Raiders need to make that decision, like, hopefully tonight, tomorrow morning, get rid of Luke Getsy. There's just too many examples, man. I have, every time I watch all the Raiders offense plays, every single time the Raiders offense makes a mistake, I will I'll clip that game, right? Or I'll save it out of the system I have access to called telemetry. I'll save that clip. I'll put it in a file called Luke Getsy. And I have like probably 14 plays from this season where it's like little things where a receiver runs an out and the quarterback throws a to a receiver running a potential curl route, or the receiver runs 20 yards and is looking to his inside and the ball's thrown to the outside at like the 12-yard mark, right? It's just things where the quarterback and receiver are not on the same page. And there's so many moments like that across this season, and to me, you can't have that as a coach, right? So I do think Luke Getsy has to be fired. He has to do a better job, right? He's too predictable at this point. David Scott, shout out to you, said, man, at this point, it's fun. It's a FU. This team, can we please get to the draft and get a good quarterback, or at least fix this trash offensive line? I hear you on that, man. I definitely hear you on that. Getting a quarterback is not going to fix this team, though, right? I will stay with we got to fix the coaches first and foremost, right? That's going to be, for me, the most important thing. How do you feel about Antonio Pierce? Do you think he has to go, or do you think he's doing a good job? Antonio Pierce has to go. 100%. Antonio Pierce has to go. And to me, it just doesn't make sense, right? You can't keep Antonio Pierce at this point. You can keep him right now if you want, right? But he can't be your coach at the end of the season, right? I think it's too early to fire Antonio Pierce. Even Luke Getsy is debatable, but you can't fire Antonio Pierce at this point. Let Antonio Pierce have the next, 6 to 12 weeks, right? And then at some point, if the Raiders are like 4-9, fire Antonio Pierce at that point. But it doesn't make sense to fire him at 2-3, right? That's just me being 100% honest. I don't think that would make sense. But I don't think he's doing a good job, because the thing is, Antonio Pierce has one job and one responsibility. And that is that he has to essentially manage the game, right? 3rd and 5, if you run the foot, like on 3rd and 5, you're going to run the football. Antonio Pierce has to know that, hey, it's 3rd and 5, we're going to run the football. He needs to make sure his coach understands we're not going for it if you don't get the first down. Or, hey, pick up 3 or 4 yards, we're going to go for it on 4th down. I don't think he communicates with his offensive coach, and his offensive coach is on the same page with him. There's moments where it's like 3rd and 5 and you run the ball, you pick up 3 yards, and then you want to punt the football. It just doesn't make sense to me, right? And I understand the concept of putting them at the 5-yard line, make them go 95 yards. We tried that against the Chargers, and the Chargers drove right downfield and they scored a touchdown on us. And we lost the game because of that, right? To me, the Raiders got to go out and take wins, right? They got to go out and be aggressive. They got to go out and, just do things in a way as, I understand the conservative approach and it makes sense at some points, but at other points, take the game, man, win the game, go out there and do your thing, And sometimes I feel like Antonio Pierce is too conservative. I would not fire him right now, though. Demokes disagrees. He thinks we should fire everyone. They chose the booger eater as quarterback 1. We'll find out, man. Aiden MConnell hopefully is going to end up being the quarterback for at least next couple of weeks to see what he has. I will say this with Aiden MConnell. He had some moments. There was a play from the 1-yard line back against our backs at the 1 yard line. Really nice pass to Jacoby Myers over that corner, right? It's a really, really good pass. Really, really good decision as well. But there were other moments where he kind of like, he threw the ball. He was standing in the end zone. He barely got out of the end zone with that, right? And he didn't get the ball past the line of scrimmage. So we got a penalty on that. We essentially were at the 1 yard line because of a grounding penalty. There was the interception where he threw it to Brock Bowers, where Bowers had like 2 guys on him. And there are multiple guys around, and you throw it with all that velocity. You don't want to throw those type of passes in the middle of the field because high velocity passes get tipped up. And those are little things that Aiden MConnell doesn't understand as a quarterback right now, right? So the thing is AP came into the season saying that, hey, I need to win games. I need to win, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 games to keep my job for next year. And AP understands that Gardner Minshew does give you a better chance to win because he's more experienced as a quarterback. We had 2 third-down plays on the first and second drive that Gardner Minshew ran with his legs, and he picked up first downs. We scored points on both of those drives. Right? We scored a touchdown, I think, on the first drive, and we kicked field goal on the second one. Right? Gardner Minshew's legs, his ability to run, and there was third and long situations in both of those aspects. We picked up the first time both times because of Gardner Minshew. So those are moments that we're not going to get with Aiden MConnell, right? Or potentially we won't get those. But I would still roll with Gardner Minshew, right? I want to see if this guy can actually, is his arm going to actually be able to win those games? I want to see that, right? Because at this point, what else do the Raiders have, right? Like, you can't beat the Broncos. You can't beat the Panthers, like teams you should be able to beat. What do you have at this point, right? So I would roll forth Aiden MConnell for that reason. But I'm not super, super, super like confident that Aiden MConnell is going to be able to win us a ton of games. Cali 215 says, I remember fans harassing Mark Davis at a game to hire Antonio Pierce and players publicly saying they want to leave if we didn't hire Antonio Pierce. You got what you asked for, raw high school coach. I mean, look, I can't say anything about that at all, man. It's crazy because, you should never make a decision based off of what fans say. It's a fact, 100% fact. Because one day we'll say something, the next day we'll say something else, and it's long term. You got to think long term always. You can't think short term. And the short term decision is saying, hey, let's fire this coach and this general manager and not give them the opportunity to prove themselves. Short term is to say, hey, let's fire Antonio Pierce after like 5 games. But I think sometimes you also know like if a guy's good or not. Right? Like Dave Ziegler, for example, drafted Tyree Wilson over Jalen Carter. He drafted Tyree Wilson over Darnell Wright. Either of those 2 guys are a lot better than Tyree Wilson at this point. And with certain guys like that, like, hey, this doesn't make sense. Or this guy's not very good. But it is funny because we did definitely had some players that were definitely saying they might request a trade. Right? I think it was Maxx Crosby. Let's just say it as it is. Maxx Crosby definitely was on board for the Antonio Pierce hire, which is why I would not trust players either. Right? No shot at Max. I love Maxx Crosby, one of my favorite players. But even Davante Adams was like, Luke Getsy's the guy, right? Oh, he was my wide receivers coach. I think there were some people in the offseason telling me on a podcast that it was Justin Fields' fault, not Luke Getsy's, and Davante Adams is Davante Adams because of Luke Getsy. It has nothing to do with Davante Adams, had nothing to do with the head coach at that time. It was only because of Luke Getsy. It was crazy. But yeah, Luke Getsy sucks, man. I hope all of Raider Nation has now realized that. Luke Getsy's a bad coach. It's crazy because Davante Adams, some people are saying, hey, Davante Adams is right to essentially request a trade. It makes sense. Now I see why he wanted to be traded out of the Raiders. The thing is, Davante Adams didn't want to be traded from the Raiders because the situation sucked or whatever. He wanted to be traded because Antonio Pierce called him out, right? Antonio Pierce wanted to bench this guy for a quarter, and he quit because of that, essentially. That's what happened, right? I don't know, people still don't know that, but Antonio Pierce wanted to keep Davante Adams on the sideline, and Davante Adams wasn't having it. So, his hamstring ended up getting hurt, and he sat out, and then he requested a trade at some point. He did this in the past as well, right? I think we just didn't recognize it at that point. In the preseason, Antonio Pierce said Davante Adams will play. Davante Adams said, I'm not playing. And then out of nowhere, Davante Adams had an injury, and he didn't play that preseason game, right? I think there's been issues with Devontae Adams and Antonio Pierce for a while now, right? I really do think that. And it's unfortunate because it would have made more sense for the Raiders to trade this guy before, right? Like before the actual season started. I think his value would have been higher in the offseason because that also gives time for teams to restructure him. And you can also kind of build your team around those cap dollars being spent. But hopefully the Raiders are able to make it work, right? We're also not approaching the trade deadline like next week, right? I think we have like 4 weeks left still. So I hope that the Raiders are able to kind of figure it out with Devontae Adams. I wouldn't even be mad if the Raiders started selling some certain guys, right? Not like Maxx Crosby, not like Christian Wilkins, but guys that have actual value, right? If the Raiders have that is, right? I wouldn't be mad if the Raiders move some pieces. Trayvon Merrick's an example of that, right? Not saying that I don't like Trayvon Merrick, but I feel like there's guys on this roster that we're not going to be able to bring back next year because of the salary cap. I wouldn't be mad if the Raiders move some of those guys, right? And it's not to tank, right? I don't think the Raiders should tank. I think the Raiders should continue to go into this season and try to win football games. Tanking doesn't make sense. You have free agent players. You have players that are going to come out in the draft. You want guys to want to play for the Raiders. Teams don't want to play for the Panthers. The Panthers next year are not going to be able to bring in any free agents, right? There will be like 3 guys that they'll overpay for, but Christian Wilkins is never going to the Carolina Panthers, right? So the Raiders got to win games because that'll allow us to attract free agents. Even Bobby Slowick isn't going to go to, regardless of if people agree with this or not, even the best offensive coaches aren't just taking any head coaching job, right? You get one opportunity. People are not stupid. They understand this at this point. You're going to get one opportunity as a head coach, right? If you're a great offense coach, you'll get one opportunity. And if you don't make of that opportunity, you might not ever get another opportunity. You might get lucky. You might get a second opportunity like how Josh McDaniels got. But Josh McDaniels will never, ever have another head coaching opportunity ever again, right? Dan Quinn has, he's with I think he's with the Commanders. This is his final chance, right? If that doesn't work out, if Cliff Kingsbury ends up leaving and then the Commanders fall off, he'll never get another opportunity either. So tanking doesn't make sense for that reason, right? That is that if you get if you can show one of these coaches that we're a good team or a good roster, they'll actually want to come to the Raiders as opposed to the Raiders getting stuck with Luke Getsy. Luke Getsy was like our 4th option, right? So we're in this situation because, Cliff Kingsbury didn't want to come here. Chip Kelly didn't either. And there's rumors that even apparently Clint Kubiak didn't want to come to the Raiders. I don't know if this is a fact, but I read this on Twitter from a guy that's a very good NFL insider, right? And he kind of hinted that Cliff Kubiak not actually want to come to the Raiders as an offensive coach. Ahmed said, I think Clint Kubiak should be the next head coach for us. Clint Kubiak definitely has some upside. I want to see him for the next couple of weeks because the first 2 games of the season, they looked very explosive. The last 2 games, they haven't looked as good. I do think the Saints have some limitations on the offensive side, and I do 100% acknowledge that. But whoever the next head coach for the Raiders is, it has to be a guy, right? It has to be a good offensive coach. Clint Kubiak has looked good, though. I do agree with that. Is there anyone on the Raiders staff that can take over the play callings? That I don't 100% know, right? I'm sure there is a guy, right? I'm sure there's someone out there that could potentially call plays, right? There's definitely some experienced coaches. I'm not 100% sure, though, You guys tell me, is there a coach that can call the play calling for the Raiders? I'm sure there definitely is, right? We have a lot of experience on the coaching staff. We have head coaching experience, but I'm not sure if any of those guys have actually called plays, right? So that's going to be the key on this one. I'm going to get back down into the comments, some of the more recent comments specifically. Joe Philbin is an offensive assistant. He could definitely call plays potentially for the Raiders. He was the offensive line coach for the Cowboys. I don't know if he's called plays in the past. He might have actually called plays. Don't quote me on that. I think he was a head coach in the past as well, too. So I think that could definitely make sense. Someone asked what's going on with Michael Mayer. Someone told me that it's a family issue that's happening with Mayer. I'm not 100% sure if that's fact, but someone did tell me that. But I don't know if that's a fact. Right? I really don't know that. I think it's more likely it's something to do with that, and not that he's wants to be traded or whatever. I think there's a chance he'll actually be back this week. We'll see if that actually ends up happening. Another thing to note, there was a time when Tommy Eichenberg had a personal issue that happened, and he's back with the Raiders too now. So we'll see what ends up happening. Hopefully he is able to kind of get back. Final super chat here. Final super chat. Jody says, how do you feel about Jaylen Monroe? I wouldn't mind Shadir Sanders, but this line will get him murdered if he doesn't have that breakaway speed. It's time for us to adapt with the league, with the scrambling quarterbacks. I like Jaylen Monroe, right? I think Jaylen Monroe is a very, very good quarterback. I know some people think like for the longest time, people weren't taking like Georgia quarterbacks or like, oh, these quarterbacks aren't good, or Ohio State quarterbacks like, oh, don't take Fields, don't take CJ Stroud. I like the idea of taking the best quarterbacks in college, especially from the best programs, because like even Shadir Sanders, people don't recognize this. So Colorado's play caller right now is Pat Shermer, who has NFL experience as an offensive coordinator, right? He's called plays in the NFL. Pat Shermer is a good coach, so I know Shadir Sanders has been coached by a good coach. Jaylen Monroe, right? He's at Alabama. They have a good coach calling their plays essentially as well, right? So I wouldn't mind taking either of those guys, right? I don't think the Raiders' offensive line is as bad as some people are saying they are. I think our left tackle will bounce back next year, right? I'll just say it again. I've said this so many times at this point, but I'm sure a lot of you guys haven't always tuned into my videos, and you guys may not have heard me. The thing with Colton Miller is this offseason he had surgery, right? So Colton Miller had surgery in, let's just say, January of this offseason. At the end of January, he's rehabbing that shoulder, right? He's trying to get that motion. He's stretching. He's lifting very, very lightweight to rehab, right? At the same time, Jackson Powers-Johnson's bench pressing 700 pounds. Andre James squatting 9,000 pounds, right? Dylan Parham's power cleaning 37,000 pounds, right? These guys are working out while Colton Miller's stretching essentially, right? So what I'm saying is in the offseason, Colton Miller wasn't lifting heavyweight, right? He wasn't getting better in that aspect. He wasn't getting stronger. He wasn't getting ready for the season. He was rehabbing his shoulder. We came into the season and Colton Miller wasn't even healthy. He didn't even practice in the offseason. He didn't even practice in training camp, right? Like this guy was not healthy, and he didn't get to get stronger this offseason. He didn't get to put the work in. So he's struggling naturally because of that, right? He's going to struggle this entire season. It's not going to get better, right? I can guarantee you guys he might get a little bit better as the season continues because he'll kind of get back into that, like that football shape and mindset. Maybe Luke Getsy will start to chip a little bit more. But he's going to continue to struggle, right? To me, I think Colton Miller is going to continue to struggle. The hope is that Colton Miller will come back next season and he'll be healthy. He'll be ready to go. Jackson Powers-Johnson does not bench press 700 pounds. I was being sarcastic. All right. But yeah, I think the Raiders will bounce back. I think as a team we'll bounce back. I also do think that as a football team, the Raiders got to try to continue to win football games. You can't tank at this point, right? 2-3 is not a record to tank at. If you're 0-5, if you're 1-4 is debatable. 2-3 is the season's not over, right? We still have a winnable game against the Pittsburgh Steelers next week. I think the Raiders got to roll forward Aiden MConnell. I want to see what he has, right? He's led 2 touchdown drives for the Raiders. I know when the game was 10-20, he had 2 drives. He didn't do anything in those drives, but he still led a touchdown drive. I want to see if this guy has an entire game, how many points he can score. And if it doesn't work with Aiden McConnell for the next couple of weeks, you go back to Gardner Minshew. Who cares at this point, right? If it doesn't work with one quarterback, go back to the other one, right? I think that's just the logical thing at this point. And if none of that works out, well, then our season will naturally be tanked at the end of the season anyways. We'll fire Antonio Pierce and we'll move forward at that point. I hope you guys all have a great week, man. I know it's going to be a hard one because the Raiders did obviously lose. And like me, a lot of you guys are impacted by the Raiders' loss. It sucks, but it is what it is. We will bounce back. We will be doing some film breakdowns this week. I definitely want to check in on Jackson Powers-Johnson. We'll check in on Aiden McConnell and Gardner Minshew a little bit. We'll look at what these guys missed, if they did miss anything. And we'll look at some of the defensive guys as well. I think Ja'Cory Bennett is legit, like legit. So I hope you guys all have a great week, and I will see you guys next time with another video.